Hey, this is Brad the Guitologist. I'm here with my good friend and confidant, brother from another mother. This is Tony Doris from Volition Amplifiers. You guys might remember, if you've stuck around my channel long enough, you might remember me mentioning Tony before. He got a mention, a shout out in that Mesa Boogie video that made me such a huge internet sensation. Turns out the problem with that particular amplifier, he helped me diagnose, so thank you for that.
Was it the muting FETs?
What's that?
Was it the muting?
It was the one with the FETs, yeah, the muting circuit, yeah. We're here today, actually, not to talk about Mesa, but to talk about his stuff. Tell us a little bit about what you brought, Tony, because this thing looks like a piece of shit from the outside, so explain to us what you got.
Well, this is actually the one that I got from you a few years back. It's been sitting in my shop.
I remember it.
I threatened people that I was going to build something in it, and they laughed at me for a while, but I really liked the way that it looked rusty and nasty, and I wanted to keep it. But it's basically an all-octal JCM 800 with a bunch of mods on it.
Okay. Now, do you know where I got this? I told you the story about where I got this thing. I was on my way back from French Lick, Indiana. We did a family something up there, and I live down here in Louisville. So I'm on my way back from French Lick, Indiana. And you know the yard sales you see sometimes, like on the side of the road where it looks like they never end the yard sale? It's like their yard is just a perpetual yard sale. This was sitting out in this perpetual yard sale, and it looked like it had been there for probably years, outside, in the elements, in the rain, snow, sleet, whatever. It didn't look like, it was almost fused to the thing that it was sitting on, and it was, I knocked on the door, and this guy came to the door, and he's like, "What do you want?" And I'm like, "What do you mean what I want? You got a yard sale out here." But it was just one of those weird experiences, and his whole house was also a yard sale, a perpetual yard sale, so you could go into his house and like look around. It's creepy old TVs and spider webs, and just, it was like, man, dude. And I took it to Tony, and we did some kind of trade. What did you buy it for, 20 bucks or 30 bucks or something?
Like that. I can't remember.
Basically, I just needed to unload it because I didn't have time for an extra project. So he was like, "I want that."
I want that.
Did this thing, I can't even remember now, did this thing have all of these knobs and shit on it?
No, it had like 3 chicken heads on it. I think it had these 3 and maybe these 2, and one of them was missing off the pot.
Oh, okay, so it was originally a 3-channel thing.
Yeah, 3-channel PA. From the best I could tell, it was from 47.
Okay.
Going by the date code off the pots and the transformer that was left in it.
So explain what you've done. What are we looking at?
Well, you got your standard gain like you would have on a JCM 800. You have your gain, then you have treble, middle, bass,
okay,
and your regular master.
Right.
And that makes up your normal Marshall stuff. This is a slope control, so you can go between Marshall stacked that way all the way over to like closer to 100K for your Fender type sound. Over
so it changes the mids?
Right.
Okay.
Then you have, I've got a regular post-phase inverter master volume so that you can go ahead and crank it all the way up.
Yeah.
Adjust it how you like and then drop down the volume, because this one works very, very well to get that distortion out of the phase inverter as well.
Right.
Then you have presence and resonance, which they normally have a presence control, but I just added the resonance. It's kind of nice to tune into your cabinet. This here is a bypass for a clipping circuit, and whenever it's in this position, it's the Silver Jubilee clipping circuit.
Oh, okay.
Whenever you push it down, it's just an asymmetrical, or it's an asymmetrical LED, but it's more or less an 800, a JCM 800 with some extra mods, and that right there allows you to like dial it in. It sounds really good when you take it over to the Fender side of things and play single coils on it.
Out. Well, he'll explain that to us. Explain yourself.
It's just one of the things that I ran into. I kind of like the way they look, so I'm always going for that Allen cap head look. I've done a lot of machinery, built a lot of machinery in the past, and
yeah,
it's just a slick look.
It looks cleaner.
Where I can do it, I bury them. The
Right.
other thing is they don't strip out as easy. There's not that much torque on them. getting them in.
And plus, when you see screws that are all boogered up and stuff, and they got the sharp edges because they've been stripped.
It's like you can't tell how many times I've opened it back up.
Right.
Because it's not screws.
Exactly. Okay, here we are inside this thing. Tell me about the caps you use. Where do you get these, and what are they?
I'm actually going through Antique Electronics Supply,
okay,
or C Distribution for the wholesale side of it.
Right.
And there's nothing special. They're just film and foil. I think they were polystyrene. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But I've used these just as replacements, and I figure if it works out really good, I'll change them out. They're easy enough if I wanted to upgrade. But get good results with cheaper caps. Just as long as they're film and foil.
You know what? I agree. I use actually even cheaper caps than these. I think I know what these are on Antique Electronics Supply. And I use the red ones I've shown on my channel a couple times. And those are the bottom of the bottom. But I've had pretty good luck with them, actually. Yeah. The only times I've had bad luck with any of those that come from Antique Electronics Supply, it was probably my fault because I accidentally pulled a leg off.
Yeah.
I think long term they should be okay. We'll see, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I had a customer that asked me if I could put in basically a Marshall JCM 800, like a 2204 circuit into it was a magnetone, and I'm like, are you sure you want to desecrate a magnetone to do that? And he's like, yeah. So I had to make it really small to fit it in, and try to use the tube sockets that were available, so on and so forth. So I made the board as small as possible. I do it on a program called DIY Layout Creator. You can get it for free on the internet. It takes a while to get used to it. I know the guy that actually runs it, so he'll modify it for me sometimes whenever there's a problem with it that I need to get around. He'll help out. I've donated to him instead of just being free,
Yeah, that's cool.
So I made that as small as possible. Same thing with like this bias board. If you ever have Merlin Blenco's books on power supplies.
I've recommended his books, yeah.
That's his bias supply. It's really nice. So I kind of just made that as a separate
Now, his
module.
power supply book is hard to come by. Do you have a copy of that?
Yes, I do.
You do?
I got it, like I was probably one of the first 100.
Man, PDF, that sucker. Everybody probably watching this is like, yeah, man, send me one.
Actually, I have the first edition of the preamp book that he kind of denounces now.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
And I've got all the notes and stuff where I went through it.
And corrected?
Yeah, and then I got the second one as well.
Yeah.
And I'm waiting on, the power amp part 2, but I don't know if he'll ever really do that.
What's the deal with that? Is that
he said it would be such a big book. There's so much material to cover on that.
Yeah.
And I would have thought it would be the other way around with preamps, but
I would have thought so too. Power amps, the power supply. What can you? What can you do with?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Anyway.
But here's a little board that I whipped together for the clipping circuit, and you can see the Silver Jubilee, which includes this cap to ground. All this over in here is the Silver Jubilee circuit, and you can see that it'll select it's actually a symmetrical set of diodes. I'm trying to think of where it was that I put that. It's right after the cathode driver. It comes off of there just before it goes into the tone stack.
Okay.
And goes into that clipper circuit.
Oh, okay.
And then, so it's not at the input, it just happens to be over there close.
Right.
But you'll notice these are all octal tube sockets because I've got 6 SL7s in each spot.
You replaced the sockets, obviously, but you left it as octals. Essentially, you've got Marshall stuff, but it's you're using a different tube.
Right.
Yeah.
You got that amplification factor of 70 on those as opposed to 100 on a 12AX7.
Right.
Basically, you turn your gain up a little bit more and you're there.
Right.
But I feel like with the octal preamp tubes, you get a little bit more harmonic content that just wouldn't be there with the 12AX7s.
I tend to agree. And you can actually shop around, if you've got a tube stash like me and probably like you too, you can kind of shop around in your tube stash and pick ones that, even if they're slightly microphonic in certain spots, sometimes they work.
Yeah, you shift them out of the first spot and put them into the phase inverter and they're great or something like that.
Yeah. Or even if you put it in V1, sometimes even a slight microphonic V1 will give you something.
Yeah, once you get over a certain threshold, it's beautiful.
Right,
so I don't throw them away. And I think, as a matter of fact, one of these tubes was original to the chassis.
You're kidding?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's the only thing that I actually used out of this whole deal.
And you were going to say something about this board. Now, what the hell is this? I've noticed this thing. As soon as you open it up, that's actually the first thing I noticed was this sideways board. What you got going here?
What that is just the board by itself without these controls is what you get from Jet City Amps whenever you can email them and ask for one of their active effects loops. And you can see that there's voltage coming here. It actually has about 260 on it right now. I think I could get it up even higher than that. I may put it on the next node down to bump that voltage up if I need more headroom. But I've been testing with it, and it sounds pretty good.
So you can just order this board. Is it already populated from Jet City?
It's already populated. The only thing I did to it was there is a resistor, like, I think I'm pointing to it right there, that I upped the wattage on. There's like a 47K resistor at 2 watts, and I think I put a 3 watt in there instead.
Okay.
Or maybe it was a 1 watt and I put a 3. This one being active, it actually drives the signal through your pedals a lot better than you would with the normal, what you would normally see there would in a 2204 circuit would be a passive loop.
Yeah.
But you get a lot more voltage swing out of that. If you don't have a high voltage loop,
right,
then you're not going to get your headroom. It's going to chop off. This one also has a bypass switch. So one of the questions on one of the forums that I frequent quite a bit was questioning whether the thing would actually bog down the signal or not. So I wanted to put in a bypass switch just for, you know, I wanted it in there, but it's also a good way to tell what that will do. As it turns out, if you turn the controls up, which I just have 1 meg pots for your send and return trims, if you turn them all the way up, you actually get a boost on this thing. So I usually set them at about 3 o'clock, and it comes out to about a unity gain. You can flip the switch back and forth and hear that it's unity and test it that way. I really hear no tonal difference. I'm going to keep testing that, of course, and that my opinion may change, but so far that's what I'm seeing, and I'm really liking the loop. And the price is not bad. Don't quote me on it, but I'm thinking it's less than $25.
Okay, for the board?
For the board. And it doesn't come with instructions. It doesn't come with the nuts and the washers for the jacks back here on the back either.
I'll be damned.
Like a lot of people were complaining that they didn't include a drill diagram so that you could just lay it on the back of your amp and push two centers. On the forum that I'm on, the Amp Garage, I actually did a report on this, you know, trying to help out on the thread there. I posted one that you can print out a PDF. It has the centers exactly right. You strike them, drill them, and there you go.
Oh, well, that's
But if you do buy this for $25, consider trying to get them to sell you the associated hardware, or you're going to have to get it yourself.
Well, yeah, that sucks, Jet City. What's the matter with you?
For what you pay for, it's a really good sounding loop, though, so don't let that stuff deter you. Find a way around it and get it. Don't worry about it.
Well, it's a cool shortcut also to get something really useful in an amplifier that you've already built too. Like, so if you can just buy one of these to mod your own amp, it's a good idea. I mean,
or to put them in for customers. I've actually got a customer. I sent him the link on it, showed him what was going on, and he went ahead and ordered it without even asking me if I would do it for him, but because he knows I would.
Right. Well, I'll include a link where you can buy one of these down in the description if you guys want to check that out.
And I'm not sure that you can go directly there and buy it, but you'll just have to contact them through that link via email.
Right. All right, here's the top of this thing and the rear, because we didn't get to see the rear really yet. Tell us about the controls here on the rear.
Well, you do have your send and return trims. You got your bypass down like that's bypassed. That's in the circuit, and your send and return jacks. And I usually put, if I can, a selector so you can select your impedance off to here. Of course, you got a main jack and an extension. The main is a closer. The extension jack is open, and also I have your bias point set up here and a 10-turn bias pot right here. I will mention that these tubes are just some test tubes that I have. I didn't decide to put anything super special in there. I'll probably just put a set of JJs in there later. But they have been hot before. I run a repair business, and those were 2 of the 4 that survived a meltdown in a DSL, I think it was. So I'm just going to use them for demos like this, and as long as I'm around, I don't really care. You know, I'm not going to loan it out like this, but I'll put in a new set.
Yeah.
But I do believe...
Well, if they work, they work. So, yeah.
I do believe that one of these, I think it was this GE here, was one that you had given me with this amp.
Oh, cool.
And then we have the can caps over here.
Survived.
And instead of putting 50/50s like a standard Marshall, I've got 32/32 cans. So you get a little bit more loose feel to the amp because of that.
Right. Yeah, it's more a little less of a bass amp kind of a thing. Well, very cool. Tell us about your, where do you normally order your transformers when you do builds?
This one, I got it off of there's a website you can go to, and they list all kind of used NOS and used transformers. Blah blah blah. I'll send you the link on that later. Pretty cool source.
Okay, I'll put it in the description.
You got to do a lot of work to figure out what it is, and they really make you jump through a hoop giving your description to them to get it.
Yeah.
But the transformers are relatively cheap. It's an old stand core, and
Okay.
it's way bigger than what it needs to be. I was afraid the filament voltage would be a bit high, but actually it's just under 7 on the preamp tubes, which is okay. It's within spec.
Yeah.
This is a Trainwreck Express output clone. It's an actual Pacific, and it was made by a guy named RJ out in New Mexico. And rjguitars.com, that's where you can get a hold of him. You can get those from him.
Cool. All right, so that concludes our little look at Rusty. But now let's move on to this thing. Tell us about this one, Tony.
This is one of the first ones I built as a prototype. I desecrated an amp, but I don't think I heard anything as far as market value. It was a Miyuki Elk made in Japan. Mm-hmm. When I opened it up, it was kind of cool because most of the parts were like Atlas caps. Everything's from the United States because of the era that it came from.
Right.
But it was a Marshall type circuit in a Fender type box. It didn't really sound all that great, even once I got it working correctly, so I figured I would just use the platform for something else.
Okay, so what? So this was a Japanese amp.
Yes, sir.
You said. So I know some Japanese amps they made Guitones, and they made stuff like when at the time, even in the '60s, they were making this stuff and knocking off fenders like for the soldiers in Vietnam, like late '60s, early '70s, that sort of thing. I wonder if this was something like that a soldier brought back.
It could be. There were several here in the United States, and I've actually had people request the old parts that I took out of this so that they could rebuild their elk. And I've sent off, I sent the reverb tank out, I've sent out the faceplate, backplate set.
Oh, cool. Well, so purists who watch my channel should take some comfort in you at least made a couple of other ones whole.
Right.
So that's good.
I couldn't find it within my heart to throw that stuff away.
Yeah.
And I actually only hung on to the plates and stuff for about a year and a half, and somebody asked me for them. And I sent them to them for free, just to help them out on their project. So I'm sure there's another Miyuki Elk that's back in shape because this one is not.
Well, cool. So what have you built into this? What is it now?
Well, we call it the Frankenstein because you can see there's a lot of holes and there's a lot of stuff sticking out of it. Back here, I've got some weird stuff going on. This is a line out, and the control for that line out. You've got your 4, 8, and 16 ohm impedance selector there. That is your output for that. Then I've got a foot switch which will control a boost that's on the front, and it will, I believe I got it set up for the tremolo as well. Which, this is the tremolo set. A manual switch that could be overridden by the foot switch. And these are actually bias ports.
Oh, okay. So you used RCA.
Yes.
Cool. So that works pretty well?
Yeah. Although you have to take the chassis out to get to it because the bias pot's down here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But you can monitor it from there and see if it's within spec to see if you need to take it out or not without getting the tubes out of it.
And I see you're using EdCore
Yeah.
transformers.
That's
Is
the
it
output.
both? Oh, that's the output. Okay.
It has the original power transformer that came with it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The impedance match wasn't right because I think it had, I can't remember what it was, but I think it was only a 4 ohm or something to that effect. So I wanted to get the 4, 8, and 16 to be able to match it up with whatever cabinet that I wanted to. So I changed the output transformer, and I think I upgraded the quality in that while I was doing it with the
Right.
Encore. Hodgepodge of components. I'm not using this socket even though I've got the filaments wired. At one time I didn't have anything in here, but I believe I got the tremolo here.
Okay.
Since this power transformer supported that many tubes, I figured I'd wire the filaments for later options, and I ended up using one anyway.
Well, okay, so this is interesting. Instead of one big board, you have 2 smaller boards with terminals.
Right. And everything can be pulled directly out. Like if you heat up the solder joint, you can pull a leg, heat up another solder joint,
just pull the leg straight up.
Change a part, all you have to do is clear the solder and go with a new part. Some of the parts are locked into place outside, like your screen grid resistors, but that's okay.
Right,
They're
so
easy enough to change.
I've seen a lot of these builds where people do, and like you've done here, but they'll wrap every component instead of using using the top of the terminal. And
wrap the wires.
I agree with what you've done here, because this makes a hell of a lot easier. You don't have to sit there and try to, if you're working on this thing, especially if you're in a pinch or something, you have this out on the road and you got to work on it.
Right.
Sitting there trying to wrap something, and
right. Or you'll end up heating up the wire too much and
below it,
melting the insulation right off of it or something like that. But the whole point is, if you build an amp like this, whether you're going to keep it or sell it to a customer, whoever has it, they should be able to go in and change out some things to maybe make it suit their own needs or their own taste a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I've actually sold amps to customers, and they can operate a soldering iron, but they have no idea about a circuit. And I'll go in and I'll say, see this resistor here? I'll show them a diagram because I have pictures of it.
Right.
I'll circle it in a diagram, tell them that's the resistor you need to change.
Right, and make it this value, and that's going to do this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I've done that, like lowered or raised the gain in an amp before for a customer by just conversing back and forth with Facebook Messenger.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great.
Sure.
And they like it. They appreciate it, because the guy that I've done that, one of the guys that I've done that with, that was the first time he'd ever seen the inside of the amp, and all of a sudden he took on a newfound respect for what Volition Amps was when he saw that. And he did really, he wasn't very confident, but once he opened it up and saw exactly what I'd showed him in a picture, he just grabbed the bull by the horns and did it, and he's much happier with his amp now. If a service tech picks this up, I'd rather have them go, oh man, this guy made it easy to fix this.
Right.
Rather than go, oh, what a peckerhead. This is going to be a pain in the butt to do this job.
I tell you what, man, that's one of the things I've really appreciated, opening up old trainer amplifiers, that the way the tops pop off of them, it's like, whoa, dude, you take your 4 screws out and you don't have to, of course this was already something before you made it, but I think if I were ever going to go to production with something, I think I'd copy that design. I don't see any reason not to, like, have the head just pop off like that. Gosh, that's so easy.
I've got a Trainer YBA1, but it doesn't have that.
It doesn't have that, yeah.
That's the only thing I don't like about that amp.
Yeah, it is.
But I do love that amp.
It's like once you go there, you don't ever want to go back.
Right.
Yeah, it's like
spoiling.
It is. It really is. But that's the kind of thing, man. You admire. You admire people who've come before you, and where were you inspired to do this sort of standoff configuration?
Well,
had you seen other ones like this, or
not really? But what it was is I wanted to go back whenever I built this. I wanted to go super heavy duty, as close to military spec as possible.
Yeah,
I could have got the fiber board like they have in Fenders, which would have accomplished the same purpose. But this to me just looked slicker, and I was trying to make a reputation at the time. So I used a little bit higher dollar components, as far as that's concerned. But components throughout. It's still the same resistors and caps that you saw in the last amp. It doesn't have to be, super fantastic. You don't have to use mustards or Sozos just to get a good sound. I mean, you may improve the sound to the point where you want it by switching to those, but if you can't tell the difference, then it is no difference really.
Yeah, there's so much of that going around. There's so much I call it cork sniffing.
Yeah.
There's so much of that crap.
Cap rolling.
Yeah, the whole cap rolling thing, and it's once you get beyond V1, your diminishing returns are like
Right.
astronomical.
We'll see if you'll notice here on V1 for the input resistor, I've got it way down here by the tube, but I put carbon comp there, and that's about the only place I'll put a carbon comp.
So if somebody was really cork sniffing, bit hardcore, you could say, well, it's got it in the right spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you could put them on the plates, but and they do make a slight tonal difference there.
Uh-huh.
But I think for the longevity of the amp, they're going to get exercised really hard in those points because of the higher voltages.
Well, yeah.
So I put in metal films, and you can put a lighter underneath of them, and they'll keep their resistance.
Dude,
high.
those are the ones. There's a guy on one of the forums, what is it, Iron Horse Amps? You know Iron Horse Amp?
No.
The guy from that amp company, they build the whole thing with metal films, and everybody in the forum is like, man, that's kind of overkill, isn't it? That's what they wanted to do, so they're making it all with metal films. But I totally agree with metal films on the plate resistors, because it's like you said, it's tonally, you're not going to notice a fucking thing. Mm-mm. You're not going to notice a fucking thing. I don't think.
You might notice a slight increase in treble from them, but it's one of those things where you could do that.
Yeah, do that and you're done.
It compensates for it.
Yeah.
But whenever you have the reliability that you do out of the metal films, and here's the other thing, the lack of noise. Because the metal films are much quieter than, especially in the plate position, I believe.
Right.
So you come up with less resistor noise whenever you go to metal film.
Oh,
I
can't tell you the number of times I've opened up a vintage amp that's been just cooked over 40, 50 years, and you start chopsticking around. It's like, oh, there's the one that goes.
Yeah.
That's that resistor needs to go, and you sure enough you measure it, and it's way out of spec.
Yeah.
You go to the next plate resistor.
Yeah.
That one too is fried.
Way out of spec.
Way out of spec, and that's because the carbon they just don't stand up.
Right.
But
they just get too. I don't know. It's just like the chemical composition of it doesn't hold together whenever it's being bombarded with a high voltage like that. It seems. Usually, if I open up an amp and I find a bad plate resistor in its carbon comp, I'll suspect almost every plate resistor in there needs to be changed.
Yeah.
And if you find a couple more, then never mind. I'm not even measuring. I'm just changing.
Just change them.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of times they'll measure fine. Sometimes you'll even get them that measure fine, but then at heat, they start to separate or something, and then you get the start to happen.
But a lot of times I've had that happen where I'm rebuilding an old amp or something like that. And if the customer requests the carbon comp stay in there, I've had an old Gibson, what was it, a GA5,
Right.
just recently, and I just went ahead and bought all new carbon comp resistors and put back in it because the guy wanted that. He wanted as much of that tone. And I'm like, look, you can't get those Allen Bradleys that they used to put in there, so it's not quite there, but you'll get that feel, and at least to a degree. And he was more than happy with it. Just loved it.
Well, not to single anybody out, but on the subject of capacitors, we touched on capacitors. You get these companies that are reissuing stuff like, well, for instance, and again, I really don't want to single anybody out, but the new Zinke Supros, unless they're building them with disc caps that are kind of microphonic and kind of shitty and kind of what I mean, really not for audio, but more winning radios and stuff like that back in the day. You're not going to capture that Led Zeppelin-ish kind of thing. You're just not going to get it. You know what I mean?
It's part of the mojo.
Yeah, it is. It's the mojo. And if you don't, and that's one case where I have kind of defended cork sniffing in caps is the difference between like polymer caps and the disc ceramic capacitors, because they do tend to, if you get just that slightest hint of microphonics, and it's like what we were talking about with tubes too. You get that slightest hint of something's off or something, and then it kind of gets amplified through succeeding stages, and then it becomes like a growl of its own, or accentuates different frequencies in a different way that you really can't. It's hard to reproduce. It's
Right.
like it has to. It's almost accidental.
Well, there's some cases too where I've seen that if you put a film and foil cap that you paid $10 for in a spot, it doesn't quite do the job. I don't care how much money you paid for it.
Yeah.
But you go back and put a ceramic cap in there, and you'll notice, oh, that's it right there.
Yep.
You go back and look at the original pictures of the amp that you're talking about, and there was a ceramic cap in there.
Right.
You know, maybe that was the reason why you did it, but there is a difference sometimes, especially whenever you get into higher gain. This amp is not that high a gain, so that's not a real issue. I wanted more clarity and just more function, more headroom in the clean department.
Yeah.
That's mainly why I didn't really care about too much, other than, you know, everything's pretty well metal film except for just a couple spots.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about that people talk about with Dumbles also. It's like when you open one of those up, people are like, oh, it looks like he went to a Radio Shack and just pulled everything and its mother off the shelf and then used stuff from stuff he tore apart. And it basically kind of like what you've done here.
But the
like
thing
you've
with
got a
Dumble-
little bit of everything in it, you know. And
The thing with Dumble, though, is whenever you go and you look at several amps from that same stretch of time, they all have the same resistors on the plate.
Sorts
and the
of- yeah.
same. So it wasn't just a random pull it out of the drawer thing.
it was the stuff he had stocked.
But it's also picked and selected according to the position it's
Sure.
Because sometimes there's carbon comps and sometimes there's metal film in those.
But that's why I think you need to, you know, if you're building amps, you kind of need to, every now and then you need to stop and like at certain points, you need to test things like A/B, like, okay, what's this? And you just clip something in. And
Yeah.
let's just take this amp. Okay, let's talk about the 5 components out of this amp that you could pull out right now and change with a different value that would most affect the tone.
Well, first off, I'm going to tell you 2 things that are outside of the amp. Number 1 is your guitar strings. And along with that, some practice or some playing.
Yeah.
But number 2 would be your speaker. Because you can make a huge difference and get an amp that you don't like to sound just like what you want by changing to the right speaker for it. In the amp, though, I think probably the output transformer makes the biggest difference.
A lot more bass if you have a bigger
Right.
one, yeah.
Bigger bandwidth or smaller bandwidth with cheaper stuff. But whenever you get around, like you said, dressing the first stage, what you do with that sets the tempo for what happens later on down the line. Whether it's noisy or not noisy, that'll get amplified or noticed later on in the line. But that's what I think it is your input stage. Like I've switched a long time ago on. There's this thing that you'll find that the 6, 7, 8 side of a triode is quieter for an input than the 1, 2, 3 side. So that's the side I always use.
Interesting. Why do you think? Filament proximity or something?
I think it is, but I've noticed it. A/B comparison. Sat there and switched it and recorded it and noticed with a test signal going through that it was just a slight bit quieter. So I started doing that. The other thing that I like to do is, and we talked about it yesterday, was paralleling that first stage, because you drop the resistor values around the stage and that contributes to less resistor noise, overall quieter amp.
Makes sense. So if I wanted to add, let's say I wanted to add more distortion to this amp, what's the one component you would change? Well, we were talking about that a minute ago, and you said, you know, you could talk to somebody over Facebook or something, and what would you do to this particular amp, you think? Like if you wanted to rock it up?
Well, since this one has a cathode driver before the tone stack, I would consider changing the gain around that and the stage prior to that. You could change the plate and the plate resistor on the stage prior to the cathode driver. You could change the cathode resistor on that cathode driver, drop it down and get a lot more gain out of it. And then going back to the stage just prior to the cathode driver, you could change the bypass cap there.
Just in the sake of clarification, you're talking about basically a cathode follower also.
Right.
That's the same thing.
Yes.
Cathode driver, just for the people at home, that's what he's talking
Yes.
about. So you're saying that that cathode follower has a lot to do with, that's driving into the tone stack, has a lot to do with whether or not it's going to overdrive.
Because I've done it on Marshalls. Case in point, the Marshall JCM 800, the rusty thing that we just looked at.
Yeah.
I think it specs out 100K for that resistor, and I think that I've got a 56K in there for just a little bit more drive.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, the stage just prior to that, because usually you've got that coupled on that one tube, the cathode bypass cap on that stage just prior to the cathode follower. You would add in more capacitance there to open up the bandwidth, to open up more bottom end.
Right.
I got the normal 4, 8, and 16 ohm impedance switch here. You can see it there. It does have a Larmar type post-phase inverter master volume here, which works quite well. There's tremolo all done on one tube, the tremolo controls. And this one, it has 2 forms of boost. This one is adding in a bigger bypass cap. This is on the second preamp stage.
Okay.
It'll add in a bigger capacitor there.
You're just changing between 2 different bypass capacitors.
Yeah, because you have no capacitor on it normally, and then you just add one in.
Oh, okay. So you go from no to
Right.
to having
I had to
one.
think about it for a minute. But you'll notice too that I've got what value of resistor is that? I can't see it from my
Let's
position.
see. It's going to be a small. Let's see. It looks.
Should be pretty big.
Well, fuck. I can't read it. It looks red, green, black. So it's is it 2 meg?
Yeah, I believe you're right. Now, what all that does is feeds a small voltage to that capacitor so that when you kick this stage in, it doesn't thump real hard.
Okay.
That's basically all.
Yeah,
that
it
is.
just kind of
Not
gives it a
thumping.
pad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one weird thing about this one is it is cathode biased, but it's adjustable.
Yeah.
So I've got resistors in parallel to resistors in series, so I can drop the value, raise it ever so slightly around the design center for the bias.
So how are you getting away with
It's a 5 watt.
Five
it's a 5
watt
pot.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I mean they're kind of hard to find. It's
I was
a
gonna
military
say,
grade.
where did you source that?
I bought a whole batch of them a few years back from a military surplus store out in California, and I believe they still have them.
Yeah.
It could have been Apex Junior. I can't remember.
But probably pretty expensive. What we
They
talking
weren't
about?
bad. They
Really?
weren't bad. They turned out they were like $3 a piece or something
Oh,
like that. So it was a deal.
Yeah, see, that's nothing. And that's usually one of the roadblocks of people cathode biasing something, because they want it to be adjustable, easily adjustable. And if you cathode bias something, it's weird because cathode bias is actually a fixed bias in terms of practicality, because it's fixed there. You have to actually change a component to change the bias. So it's confusing.
Right. I always can tell the level of knowledge that my customers have by whether they understand that fixed bias actually can move around and cathode bias is fixed.
Right. Yeah, it's and that's usually a stumbling block. What I was going to say is, the availability of that pot right there, that 5 watt pot, is kind of a stumbling block to people designing in that way.
Right.
I would say.
Well, this one was designed so that you could put in 6L6s and rebias it, put in KT66s, rebias
And
it.
make it easy.
Right.
Yeah.
And you could also put in 6V6s and change the impedance to match back up, because it would change with that.
Right.
But-
So you would basically you would technically be mismatching your impedance from your
Right.
cabinet at that
Right.
point. So
And that's another reason why you want the 4, 6, and 18, so you can do something exactly like that.
right. So for what we're talking about for you guys at home, we're talking about on an amp like this. You could that's designed for but it's designed for whatever tubes. But he's got what EL34s in here right now. You could actually go to a 6V6 with this EL34 designed amp, rebias it here, and then you because your output transformer has it's basically a different turns ratio on the output transformers. What your 6V6 wants to see. So what you do is you compensate by mismatching this to your cabinet. So it'll actually read wrong whenever you have this plugged into your cabinet.
Right. And I've done some amps where I have a secondary ring around that shows what the 6V6
It's supposed to be.
So
Yeah.
it's not confusing at all to the customers. This is my amp. It's not going out of the
Right.
shop.
Right.
It's a loaner on occasion. It's been recorded with and so on, but it's not getting sold, so I don't care.
Well, for you guys who don't build stuff, if you're like me and you don't build big things like this will be an education, because like I said, Tony, he knows his stuff. This is one of his first builds for his own personal amp. So Tony would probably be the first to tell you this is a little bit messier than what he's putting out now to customers.
Still proud of it though.
But yeah, it's beautiful.
It sounds fantastic. That's what really counts.
Well, we're going to listen to it. I wanted to ask you another thing about this, about your etching
Yeah.
on your logo. What have you done? What have you done here?
Basically, I use for that one. We're switching our method of doing it right now, but for what this was and what we've done in the past, I print an image out with press and peel that you would use to print PC board traces with, and iron it on, fill in all the crap that didn't get covered, make sure it looks right, and then use basic like ferrochloric acid to etch the aluminum. And what it is all this in here was covered by the mask. What you see there was left out.
Right.
Whenever I get done with that, I basically just fill it with Tester's model paint, and it looks like a second grader did a bad job of coloring it in. I let that dry overnight, and then I sand it back out so that you take some of the paint out of the you leave it in the edges.
So,
and stuff.
okay, yeah.
So it gives it an old rustic kind of look, and it's kind of rough.
Right, but it's a true handmade thing. I mean, just that plate right there probably took you a couple hours, didn't it? Yeah.
I mean, I was doing a lot of stuff at the same time, so you got to kind of do that, or you're going to lose
Economies
your
of
butt.
scale. Yeah,
Right.
you got yeah.
But I did several plates all at the same time.
Did you tell? Am I mistaken? Did you tell me your wife helped you with these?
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
She does a lot of the graphics. Like, I'll just give her the concept of a pedal, and she'll come up with all the graphics. Like, I've got that can drive pedal that's out in the car. You know, she just had an Andy Warhol moment, and she came up with the Campbell's soup can and changed
cool.
it to Volition and everything. So she'll do a lot of the artwork, and then I just execute whatever she comes up with.
Right.
She helps me out. She helps out tremendously on the execution of it as well. Don't want to sell that short.
Well, speaking of pedals, we got to meet the famous Gearman dude yesterday. What did you think about that?
I thought he is not Jack Black. He seemed like a really nice guy. Glad to get to meet him. It gave him a pedal to work with, and we'll see what comes out of that in a couple
Yeah,
weeks.
very cool. I think Gearman dude is going to do a demo of one of Tony's pedals. He actually, in case those of you don't know, Gearman dude, he's been around forever and a day. I think about 10 years on YouTube, and he does a lot of demos of pedals. Go check him out. I'll actually put a link to his page down in the description. You should check him out. But he actually lives here in Louisville as well, and I've known him for a few years now, and really nice guy, really good guy.
And I tell you what, before I ever met the guy yesterday, I've always used him for a reference. If there's a demo video out there, that's the one I'm going to spin amongst others to get a good reference.
If you see like 5 of the same pedal, I usually click on his too.
Right, because he's consistent.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not going to kill the pedal, and he's going to give it a lot of different guitar tones. He's going to change things up, put the pedal through its paces. Some people, you get on there and they drone through some kind of fuzz tone the whole time, and it's not very informative.
I do the most terriblest pedal reviews ever. I seriously, I'll get stuck on like one sound, and I'll start hypnotizing out and tripping out on this one sound or something, and then I'll just do I'll start playing and forget I was playing. So I mean,
That's usually a good pedal, dude.
yeah, seriously. Show me this last one that you have here.
Okay, this little guy, there's a good friend of mine who's passed away that I got the cabinet and the chassis from. It's got an overdrive switch with a drive and a level. It's almost like a master that will cut down the volume of that so that it blends better.
Okay.
And it's on the switch. You take it out, all you've got is a volume for your gain. You got a treble and a bass control. And what it is the overdrive section is the overdrive from a Dumble overdrive special in particular, just grafted into another amp that's set up simple. The treble and bass controls don't touch ground. And what it is if you look at the schematic for a 5E3 Tweed Deluxe, you'll see that the tone control on it doesn't touch ground. There's a cap feeding the pot and then a cap to ground. So it's not actually touching ground, it's isolated to a degree. Then the bass control is just an in-series kind of cut for the bass as well. So you have a real raw sounding preamp.
So you're basically just increasing the series resistance on the line.
For those for the frequency you determine by the rotation of the pot. Yes.
Right.
And that makes that simple. Then that section dumps into another, what I call a fake PI, a fake phase inverter. If you're going single-ended, you don't need both phases. So I simulate what you would do for one side of a phase inverter, use those values. But I parallel that tube as well, so those values change because of the parallel aspect.
Look what's inside. You got a solid state rectifier?
Got a solid state rectifier. I was experimenting with different rectifiers. Everything kind of cut too much voltage, so I just ended up putting the solid state in there. I cannot really tell you where that power transformer came from, but I do know that it was out of probably an old reel-to-reel or something like that. Voltage was pretty good, so I used it. Same thing, I think there was a choke in something else. So I pull them like this and write that down. And
so another parts amp.
Yeah, just parts amp. Just aftermarket, cheap output transformer. I can't believe how good it actually sounds.
I'm sorry, and this was a choke?
Yeah, that's a choke. And then this is just the output transformer. The only thing I don't like is it's one impedance, so you're stuck with that. But this one I did different than I do with a lot of my other builds, because it's all point-to-point. And I had a lot of this, like I started out with the transformer wires were all cloth covered. I had just redone a Magnavox 175 not that long before this. And there's one section that jumps from the preamp to the power amp, and it's a big string of all this nice cloth covered cable. So I plucked all that out, wired everything up. And this is going along with what I was doing with Mike Langford and the Mike preamp thing. Doing a lot of point-to-point building with him.
Right.
So a lot of people are uncomfortable with it, but I went ahead and I like doing it that way. And I think you can actually make it look good if you try. Some people think it looks like spaghetti or whatever, but
yeah, I think it's a matter of pride, and I can totally relate with the pride aspect of builders wanting to do things that look beautiful.
Yeah.
But there's a certain point where it's like, okay, point to point was done in the real early days of tube technology by everybody. Like, and it was up until about the late 40s or 50s, nobody even thought about doing it another way. So
right. It all had to do with aliens.
It really was. It was when they landed in what was that place they fucking crashed? Yeah, man, they crashed and fucking brought us all they had a board. They had PC boards. I think that's when we got them, and that's when we also got transistors. I think there's actually some people who think
there's actually a lot of things from DuPont that got kicked out at that time. Different textiles and components.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to say I totally
different paints and things
funny.
too, like different stuff, weird shit.
Yeah.
And plastics started to really take over, and they got all these different polymers and stuff. I mean, it's fucking.
It's just mere speculation.
It's total speculation, but we don't give a fuck. My point is there's nothing wrong with point to point.
No pun intended.
Yeah, but a lot of amp builders they don't like the whole spaghetti look of things. They want everything to be straight, and everybody does like the whole right angles and stuff too. It's like everybody do right angles into this and right angles into that.
Well, if you'll look here, like this is two different strips on each of these, and all I did was roll them around till the ends butted together. I knew the number of terminals that I had to have pretty well for everything, so I knew what size of terminal strips to put in there.
Right.
And you could see they're filled almost to the max. Very little is not used on them. But it's just one of those things. I did an MX-10 or no, rather an Altec 1567A tube mic preamp, where I did it all point to point, just like this, and it gave me doing that, repeating 4 channels over and over and making them all look identical, gave me the confidence to be able to just go in and do one like this.
Yeah, I had a Duquesne amplifier.
Yeah.
It was
I had one of those while
big
back.
PA.
Yeah.
And those are so well laid out.
Yeah.
Beautifully laid out, and they're all point to point.
Yeah.
And it's like you can see this is channel 1,
Yeah.
this is channel 2, and everything is exact.
Right.
So yeah, it can be really beautiful, point to point.
Actually, there's some of the gurus that, they don't want to build point to point, but they will admit that you have, like in the case of this amplifier, you have your filter caps that are right there at the stage where they're needed.
Yeah.
So everything's closer, and I know electricity is supposed to go at the speed of light, but there's a lot of people who will tell you that building everything right up on the tube socket is the best. I mean, you think about it, where are your grid stoppers in a Fender amp?
Well, there's a resistance. If the more distance it has to go through,
Right.
Electrons, there's going to be a resistance between point A and point B.
Right.
So
And the other thing is, with point to point, a lot of times you'll cut down on the interactivity between different parts of the signal chain, because everything around this tube is so localized to it, it doesn't have an influence from anything else.
And you don't have wires that have to go over here, because that's the only place you could put that component on the board.
I'd like to just show you what I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
This is that paralleled input stage, and you can see if you look down in here, there's parallels going between the different sides, the plates and the grounds. Everything is localized. You've got your cathode bypass cap, big 1 microfarad right there. And like I said, you've got your filter cap right here. This one basically is your overdrive, and if you look at it, you'll see your 2 little snubber caps that go from your plate to grid on your overdrive.
What are those, like a little pico, 100 pico or
250 pico. Anyway, you can basically identify this. This is your trimmer for your input into your overdrive, just like you'd see on an overdrive special schematic. And then you get to this section. This is that fake phase inverter, fake PI is what I like to call it. I don't know who coined the term, but it's not that old of a term. But,
right.
Paralleled that to get everything down and quiet. And this switch will bypass this section completely. The only other weird thing, I mean, it's a 6v6 output. This resistor here is there to monitor your bias, so you can you
like
just clip onto either side of that. Right. But this is the one thing that you don't find in a lot of single-ended amps, and that's a bias supply, negative bias supply.
Okay.
This over here.
So you have a negative biased.
It's a fixed bias.
It's a fixed
amp
bias.
Instead of like you'd pick up a champ or any kind of derivative of that.
They're always going to be cathode bias, really. Yeah.
Why did they not do it? Is it because I started thinking that why did they not ever have? Why do you not have a fixed bias set up on a single-ended amp? And I tried to find out why you couldn't. I never got an answer as to why you couldn't, other than a pretty wise guy on the Amp Garage. He came back and said, well, just look at it this way. This part, this part, this part, this part, this part, they all add up. With a cathode biased amp, it's 2 parts.
It's 2 pieces, yeah.
And you don't have to worry about it. You can slap tubes in and out. It's less maintenance.
And that's the thing. I think you'll find so many amplifiers that were designed just to be economical, and for no other reason than that.
Right.
And Fender was not immune to that. Everybody thinks, oh, well, it's Leo Fender. He must have picked all the best stuff that ever was made. He must have got stuff directly from the fucking aliens. No,
he was the Henry Ford of amps.
Yeah, he absolutely was. It's like the Model Ts, man. His stuff was like the Model Ts of amplifiers.
Not knocking anything that he ever did.
I'll tell you what, actually, I'll take that back. You know who the Model T of amplifiers was? Was Nat Daniel of Dan Electro. Dan Electro amplifiers are made in the most, I mean, he grabbed stuff. Probably it looks like stuff he peeled off his garage walls. I mean, to make the cabinets. Yeah. I mean, really, and it's just amazing to me. I admire it so much. It's like because
the ingenuity,
the ingenuity of
sourcing.
It. Yeah, the sourcing of components is like.
Well, like the old Gibson amps. I know you probably know this, but the old Gibson, those smaller combos. A lot of times the foot switch was the cutout of a bout on a Les Paul. Yeah. That chunk of wood, they just hollowed out and used it for a foot switch.
And they used it for a foot switch. And it's even got the little curve on the front edge of it. Yeah. And that's what it is. That'll fit right in the Les Paul. And that makes it worth like $20 million.
I know. And think about it. It's a throwaway piece of wood that they just turned it into something they needed.
But that was what Nat Daniel did with like other manufacturers. He would source things. Oh, he would call up manufacturer. He must have been doing this, calling up other manufacturers and saying, "What is your waste? What does your waste look like? I want to go in your scrap pile and just and thumb around for a minute. That's exactly what it looks like. It looks like he had a shop right next to like a trailer making factory or something. Seriously, because he would have these pieces of trim on guitars that looked like it was a piece of trim off of a what are they, manufactured housing or something? Yeah, seriously. Weird, just weird, but inspiring to me. I love it.
And efficient.
Yeah. But so you were saying, the whole reason why somebody wouldn't want to design a fixed biased amplifier. So how do you do it? How do you tie in the fixed bias on a single ended?
Well, this one here, I mean, you just basically you ground your cathode pin directly to ground, or in this case through a 1 ohm resistor, so you can meter it.
So you can meter it, yeah.
But you come back in through your pin 5 and add in, and this transformer actually had a bias tap on it right here. It had a dedicated one, and I pulled them off of the HT supply for it as well. It's not really that much. There's one more resistor different was all.
Yeah.
But basically built up I can't remember where I built the bias supply from.
And that's the other thing too, having a bias supply transformer. So you got to have a whole other winding.
Right.
Yeah. So then that's probably the most expensive thing.
Yeah, but for those people who want to build and try this, you can do it off of your regular HT tap that's coming off of the transformer. You can just take like a 220K resistor and
drop it down a bit.
Drop it down a little bit before or after the reverse diode.
That would just have to be a big 10-watt resistor or something.
No, not really, because you're not drawing that much amperage at all.
Okay.
I usually use a half watt because it's what I have.
Oh, yeah, because you're only using,
And this one, you'll notice, opposed to the other amps, they're all carbon comp. Just one of those things. I had the old wire. I just wanted to go with the nostalgic, maybe a little bit of, influence in tone-wise because of that.
Yeah.
So I just went ahead and I got all 1 watt resistors. There's a couple of them that I didn't have on hand, so I went ahead and put in.
Just between me and you, this is all I stock. This style of resistor as standard. If somebody asks for a build or something, I guess I would have to order them.
Yeah.
Because this is all I stock. These 1 watt carbon films. I mean, because they do a pretty good job in the signal paths. And I've never seen a reason to stock like 1.5 watts because it's just a lot of stock. It's a lot of shit to order.
I think the majority of my stock are all the half watt metal film like you see right here. Yeah. I do have quite a few built up, but I don't use them. What I use these for is if I've got an amp that is based on carbon films or whatever, I try to go back in with it and not change that for the customer.
Right.
But in my own builds, this is kind of a rarity.
Right. Okay, so that's it for these 3 amplifiers by Tony Doris of Volition Amps. Thanks to him for stopping by. Thanks, Tony.
Not a problem.
Thanks you guys for sticking around, and for now, y'all take care.